My name is Elias Thorne. If you were to ask, my colleagues at the city library would describe me as meticulous, reserved, and a bit of an anachronism. I'm 38 years old, and my life is a carefully curated collection of silences. The silence of the reading room at midday. The silence of my small apartment, where the only sound is the turning of a page. But most importantly, the silence of history. As the head archivist, I am the custodian of forgotten stories, the keeper of ghosts who speak only through faded ink on brittle paper. My world smells of decaying leather and acid-free glue. It is a safe world, a predictable world. And I had mistaken that predictability for peace. That peace is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the intrusion of my family. They are a loud species. My older sister, Clara, for instance, operates at a volume the rest of the world finds jarring. She's a high-powered marketing executive who believes any problem can be solved with a sufficiently aggressive branding strategy. She views my life's work not as a passion, but as a personal failing. Elias, it's not too late to pivot, she'd announced over a painfully expensive lunch last month, her voice slicing through the restaurant's polite murmur. You have a good mind. Imagine what you could accomplish if you applied it to something that matters. By matters, she meant makes money. Her attempts to help always feel like a hostile takeover of my soul. Then there is Leo, my younger brother. He is a beautiful, chaotic melody in a world that demands structure. A musician with the heart of a poet, and the impulse control of a child. His phone calls are always a whirlwind of frantic energy, a tapestry of grand dreams and immediate, desperate needs. The last time he called, he spoke of a breakthrough with his music, a producer who loved his sound. The euphoria in his voice was real, but so was the inevitable request that followed, a few $100s to grease the wheels. I sent it. I always do. It is the price of admission for his brief, brilliant flashes of hope, a price I pay knowing I'm funding the storm, not the recovery. And hovering above us, the self-appointed sun in our fractured solar system, is my Uncle Marcus. My father's older brother. After my parents were killed in a collision of steel and shattered glass 2 decades ago, Marcus draped himself in the mantle of the patriarch. He is a man who loves the idea of family, the public performance of it. He thrives on charity galas and community awards, his benevolence a carefully crafted public relations campaign. But in private, his warmth is a low-wattage bulb, casting long, cold shadows. He looks at me and sees a disappointment. He looks at Leo and sees a liability. He looks at Clara and sees a reflection, albeit a less impressive one, of his own ambition. This was my life, a constant, exhausting negotiation between my quiet sanctuary and their relentless noise. A Tuesday morning, however, introduced a new sound. The sharp, unfamiliar ring of a landline I keep for emergencies. The call was from a law firm, a name so old and steeped in wealth it sounded like a character from a Victorian novel, Sterling, Finch, and Davenport. The young man on the line spoke with an air of practiced indifference, as he requested my presence at the reading of a will. There must be a mistake, I said, picturing a clerical error in a dusty file. I believe you have the wrong Mr. Thorne. The will of Mr. Alistair Thorne, the voice replied, devoid of emotion. My great-uncle. He was less a man, more a myth in our family, a cautionary tale my father would tell about a man who had prized his pride over his blood, vanishing from the family narrative entirely. The firm's offices were located in a shard of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. The elevator ascended with a silent, stomach-lurching speed, delivering me to a realm of hushed carpets and air that smelled of lemon polish and old money. I sat in a leather chair that was worth more than my car, feeling like a misplaced historical document in a stark, modern gallery. The lawyer who greeted me was Mr. Sterling himself. He was a man who seemed carved from ancient wood, his face a road map of other people's secrets. He didn't offer condolences or small talk. He offered a fact, dropped into the silent room like a stone into a deep well. My great-uncle Alistair, the family exile, had died a month prior. And he had been, for lack of a better word, rich. Unfathomably so. His estate was valued at over $80 million. The number was meaningless. It was a sound, a collection of syllables. It had no anchor in my reality of library budgets and instant noodle dinners. Then Mr. Sterling delivered the anchor. The will contained a peculiar, theatrical stipulation. A preliminary test. A sum of $100,000 was to be awarded, in full, to a single member of my immediate family. And the choice of who was most deserving was to be mine, and mine alone. But why me? The question felt small in that enormous room. He didn't know me. Sterling's eyes, ancient and knowing, met mine. Alistair was a student of human nature, Mr. Thorne. He didn't need to know you. He needed to know your family. And he trusted you to be an impartial judge. He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished expanse of his desk. The Thorne family crest, a hawk clutching a book, was embossed in wax, sealing it shut. A letter from Alistair, Sterling explained. His instructions are explicit. You are to open it only after you have made your decision and the funds have been transferred. Not a second before. I left that office feeling like I was walking on a different planet. The 80 million was a distant star, a cold and untouchable light. But the 100,000 was a burning coal in my hand. And the envelope in my briefcase was a testament, a judgment, a final, poisoned gift from a ghost. I didn't know it then, but the test wasn't for my family. It was for me. And I was already failing. A secret of this magnitude does not stay secret for long. It has its own life, its own gravity. The law firm, bound by protocol, sent out formal notices of Alistair's passing to all known relatives. The letters were dry, legalistic documents, mentioning only the existence of an estate. But that was enough. The word estate was a scent of blood in the water, and the sharks began to circle. My phone, once a silent companion, became a vessel of intrusion. First Clara, then Leo, then Marcus. Their texts were casual, feigning concern, but they all ended with the same hook. We should talk. I decided to perform the dissection on my own terms, in my own laboratory. I called a family meeting at my apartment. The thought of them all together in my small, book-lined space felt like a violation, like introducing a contagion into a sterile environment. They arrived precisely on time, a rare show of synchronized Thorne family effort. Clara surveyed my worn armchair as if it were a strange artifact from a lesser civilization. Leo paced by the window, his restless energy making the room feel even smaller. And Marcus stood in the center, a lighthouse of calm authority, his presence subtly diminishing everything around him. I didn't embellish. I stood before them, the executor, the judge, and laid out the facts. The long-lost relative. The test. The $100,000. I watched their faces as the number settled in the air. For a moment there was a perfect, stunned silence. And in that silence I saw them. Not as my family, but as they truly were. I saw the flash of furious calculation in Clara's eyes. I saw the drowning wave of desperate hope wash over Leo. And in the placid, unreadable depths of my Uncle Marcus's gaze, I saw something far more dangerous, the patient, coiled stillness of a predator. The performances began almost immediately. Clara, naturally, made the first move. She summoned me to a restaurant where the menus have no prices and the waiters move with the silent efficiency of ghosts. It was her home turf, a cathedral of power. Elias, she began, after a sommelier had performed a lengthy ritual with a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly rent. I'm going to be direct. This isn't about money for me. It's about legacy. She slid a leather-bound portfolio across the table. Inside were charts, projections, a 5-year plan. I'm on the verge of acquiring a smaller competitor. It's the final piece I need to elevate my firm, to turn it into a real powerhouse. A Thorne enterprise. Think of what that would mean for our name. She saw me not as her brother, but as a loan officer. She was pitching me. Her appeal was scrubbed clean of any messy emotion, presented as a flawless business proposition. It was the most honest performance of them all. Leo's was anything but. He didn't call. He simply materialized at my door late one night, a wraith carved from rain and desperation. He stood shivering on my doorstep, his thin jacket plastered to his skin, his guitarist's hands shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't want to come inside, as if he knew his chaos was something that shouldn't be brought indoors. He told me he was in trouble, his voice a raw whisper against the storm. He owed people money. Real money, to people who don't send polite reminders. "They came to my apartment, Eli," he said, his eyes wide and haunted. "They didn't touch me. They just moved my guitar. They put it in the middle of the room and told me how flammable wood is." He held out his hands, trembling. "They're not just going to break my hands, they'll burn my soul. This money, it's not for a dream. It's to buy back my life." The fear in his eyes was authentic, a raw, primal terror. But woven through it was the undeniable thread of the addict's perfect lie, a story crafted to elicit the precise response he needed. And my heart, the foolish, traitorous organ, ached for him. And then there was Marcus, the maestro. He was the most cunning of all because he asked for nothing. He invited me to his country club, a hushed sanctuary of green lawns and old money. "Your great-uncle was a bitter man, Elias," he said, his voice laced with a gentle, paternal sadness. He looked out over the perfectly manicured golf course. "He saw the worst in people because he was terrified they would see the worst in him. This test, it's a cruel thing. It's designed to make you cynical, to poison you with suspicion. He's trying to remake you in his own image." He then told me a story about my father, a tender memory of a fishing trip, a story I knew for a fact had never happened. It was a beautiful, intricate lie, designed to weave a bond of shared grief between us. "Don't let his ghost win," Marcus said, placing a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Whatever you decide, know that your true inheritance is this family. I am here for you, no matter what." He presented himself as the only one who could see the truth, the only one who loved me more than the money. He was offering me salvation from the very dilemma he was a part of. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. In the days that followed, my life became a prison of their making. The quiet order was gone, replaced by a constant, humming anxiety from their calls, their texts, their subtle emotional blackmail. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. The sealed envelope from Alistair sat on my desk, a silent, impassive observer to the entire, grotesque pageant. I began to understand. This wasn't a gift. It was a scalpel. A tool designed by a cynical old man to dissect the body of our family and lay bare the sickness within. I just hadn't realized yet that the disease was terminal. The first tangible sign that I was no longer a judge in a simple contest, but a player in a much darker game, came on a Thursday evening. I came home from the library late, my mind a swamp of my family's competing narratives. My apartment has a specific silence, a hum of old paper and dust motes dancing in the lamplight that I know intimately. That night, the silence was different. It was the silence of a held breath. A book on my reading table, a biography of the Romanovs, was lying face down, its spine bent. I never leave a book face down. It was a small thing, a desecration only I would notice. My eyes swept the room. My mail was neatly stacked, but the order was wrong. A utility bill was placed on top of a library journal. Wrong. Then, my gaze fell upon my desk. The sealed, cream-colored envelope from Alistair had been moved. It was shifted less than a quarter of an inch to the left, but its position relative to a faint coffee cup ring was wrong. Nothing was stolen. No drawers were ransacked. This was not a burglary. It was a message. Someone had been here, in my sanctuary. They hadn't found what they were looking for, but they had left their scent, a violation that lingered in the air like a poison. My blood ran cold. This was no longer just about greed. One of them was desperate enough to commit a felony. The psychological assault began the next morning. An email, sent from a disposable, encrypted address, was waiting in my inbox. The subject line contained a single word, Leo. Inside was a grainy, zoomed-in photograph. My brother, his face pale and slick with sweat under the harsh glare of a street lamp, was handing a thick wad of cash to a man whose face was a collection of scars and menace. The message below was brief and brutal. Asterisk, his real debt is over 50,000. He's not just a gambler. He's a drowning man who will pull you under with him. Asterisk, it was a surgical strike, designed to amputate my sympathy. The sender had to be Clara, I thought. It had her fingerprints of cold, corporate efficiency all over it. 2 days later, a second email arrived. The subject, the saint. This one contained a password-protected file. The password was my mother's maiden name. A cruel, intimate detail. Inside were scanned pages of bank statements from Uncle Marcus's community foundation. I am a librarian. My life's work is to follow the threads of information to find the truth. I spent all night in a feverish trance, cross-referencing names, dates, and shell corporations. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. A complex web of embezzlement. My uncle, the pillar of the community, was a gifted thief, siphoning off thousands of dollars a year from donations meant for the city's poor. This attack felt different. It was too personal, too meticulously researched for Clara. This had the bitter taste of a family schism, something uglier and older. I realized I was a historian with only one side of the story. I needed to know the man who had set this all in motion. I began to dig into Alistair, not as a nephew, but as an archivist. The internet was a dead end, but paper always leaves a ghost. In the library's deepest archives, surrounded by the smell of decaying newsprint, I found him. Society pages from the 1970s mentioned him as a brilliant but reclusive financier. Then I found what I was looking for, an article about the tragic death of his business partner in a boating accident. And there, listed as a junior associate at their firm, a young man who had provided a quote to the press about the terrible loss, Marcus Thorne. It was a single thread, but I pulled at it. The thread led me to a name I had almost forgotten, Amelia. My cousin. Marcus's only child. He had violently disowned her 2 decades ago for marrying a man he deemed beneath her station. I found her living a quiet life in a small town upstate. I drove out to see her on a Saturday, the city shrinking in my rearview mirror. She had my father's kind eyes. I didn't mention the will. I just told her I was researching our family's history. She spoke of a different Alistair than the one Marcus had described. He was lonely, she said, her voice soft with memory. But he was kind. When my father forbade me from going to art school, Alistair secretly funded my first year. He sent me books. She smiled. He said they were windows out of a small world. She painted a picture of a thoughtful, solitary man, not a cynical monster. The final piece of the puzzle was delivered by the one person I least expected to help, Clara. Her naked ambition had driven her to hire a private investigator to dig into any leverage she could find. She called me, her voice stripped of its usual corporate polish, replaced by a sharp, nervous energy. The official cause of Alistair's death was an accidental fall, she said, getting straight to the point. But it's messy, Elias. He was a recluse, a creature of habit. His security logs show he had a visitor on the night he died. The police never identified them. She paused, and I could hear her sharp intake of breath. But the PI found something. A neighbor saw a car parked on the street that night. An old, meticulously restored 1968 Jaguar XKE. Just like Uncle Marcus's. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. The world tilted on its axis. The break-in. The blackmail. The embezzlement. The secret kindness. The car. The pieces were no longer just pieces. They were clicking into place, forming a monstrous mosaic I didn't want to see. This was never a competition for money. It was a dark, tangled web of lies, betrayal, and maybe murder. The test wasn't for me to judge them. It was for me to finish a story. And I had the sickening, terrifying feeling that the final chapter had been written in blood. Fear is a paralyzing agent. For weeks, it had held me in its grip. But the truth is a powerful antidote. For the first time in my life, the quiet solitude of my library felt not like a refuge, but like a war room. The ghosts of the past I usually communed with were silent. The only ghost I was interested in was Alistair. I was no longer a passive observer in his story. I was its chosen executor. The fear that had coiled in my gut for weeks began to harden into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. I owed it to Alistair, the phantom relative who had seen me more clearly than my own family, to finish what he started. My first move was to meet Clara's private investigator myself. We met in a dimly lit corner of a downtown coffee shop that smelled of burnt espresso and rain. He was a former detective with tired eyes that had seen the worst of human nature, and were no longer surprised by any of it. I paid him in cash for his original, unredacted report. He confirmed what Clara had told me, but added a chilling detail she had omitted. The neighbor, an elderly woman, hadn't just seen the jaguar, she'd been woken by a sound. A single, sharp shout, followed by a heavy thud, like a sack of books being dropped down a flight of stairs. She dismissed it as late-night revelers. But the time she noted was 10:17 p.m. The paramedics weren't called for another hour. An hour of silence. An hour of decision. An hour for a man to watch his brother die and choose to do nothing. Armed with this, I went back to the 50th floor. I walked into Mr. Sterling's mahogany office not as a confused heir, but as a collaborator. I placed my hands on the polished surface of his desk. "This was never about $100,000, was it?" I said, my voice as quiet and steady as the room itself. "It was an investigation. Alistair's final move in a game he knew he wouldn't live to see the end of." Sterling didn't flinch. For the first time, a slow, thin smile touched his lips, a flicker of genuine respect in his ancient eyes. "Alistair was a brilliant man, Mr. Thorne. He understood that character is a stone. You can only know its true nature by putting it under pressure." He leaned forward, his voice a dry rustle of paper. "He believed the courts were for criminals, but the truth was for family. He chose you because his research showed you were the only one who valued the integrity of a story more than the allure of a fortune. He is trusting you to write the final page." That was the only benediction I needed. My path was no longer a murky trail of suspicion, it was a clearly lit road. I spent the next 2 days meticulously arranging the pieces. I made one final trip upstate, to the small town where my cousin Amelia lived. This time, I told her everything. The will, the money, the break-in, the suspicions, the car, the hour of silence. The shock on her face was quickly replaced by a quiet, profound sadness that seemed to settle into the lines around her eyes. "My father," she said softly, her gaze distant. "He was always a man who would burn down a forest to claim the last standing tree." I told her then that I had made my decision. The $100,000 was hers. Not because she was the most deserving, but because she was the only one Alistair had ever truly loved. I told her I was arranging a final family meeting and warned her that what was coming would shatter the myth of the Thorne family forever. She simply nodded, understanding the grim necessity of it all. Then I returned to my apartment and sat at my desk. I composed a simple text message to Clara, Leo, and Uncle Marcus. A summons. Asterisk. "I've made my decision. My apartment. Sunday at noon. It's time to end this." Asterisk. As I hit send, my eyes fell upon the sealed envelope from Alistair. For weeks, it had been a symbol of mystery, a source of dread. Now I understood what it was. It was a key. It was a weapon. It was the truth, condensed into a single, physical object. On Sunday morning, a storm rolled in from the east, the sky turning a bruised, heavy purple. The weather felt appropriate, a reflection of the coming cataclysm. They arrived one by one, like actors taking their places on a stage. Clara, dressed in a severe black suit, her face an impassive mask of corporate readiness. Leo, pale and fidgety, a man walking to the gallows of his own making. And finally, Uncle Marcus. He arrived with a confident, benevolent smile, as if he was merely gracing us with his presence, certain he had already won. They gathered in my small living room, the air thick with greed, suspicion, and the smell of rain. The storm broke, lashing against my windows, the first crack of thunder echoing like a gunshot. The curtain was about to rise on the final act. And for the first time, I was ready to be the director. I stood before them in the charged silence of my living room. The storm outside was a physical manifestation of the one about to break within these walls. For the first time in their presence, I felt no fear, no intimidation. I was merely an archivist, and the time had come to present my findings. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear and even, cutting through the tension. "I have made my decision. I've spent weeks considering what each of you wants, and what each of you has proven you deserve. My eyes went to Leo first. He flinched, unable to meet my gaze. Leo, I said, not unkindly. Your pain is real. But your life is a tapestry of beautiful lies you tell yourself and everyone else. This money would not save you. It would only be a more expensive drug, a faster route to the bottom. I turned to Clara. She straightened her back, her expression unreadable, ready for a negotiation. Clara, I said, your ambition is a thing of astonishing power. You build empires. But you wanted to use this family's legacy as leverage, and me as a stepping stone. You see love as a transaction. Finally, my eyes settled on Uncle Marcus. He was smiling faintly, a look of paternalistic sympathy on his face, as if he pitied the others for their obvious flaws. And then there is you, Uncle. The patriarch. The saint. The man who lectured me on the poison of cynicism while presenting himself as the moral center of this family. His smile broadened. He believed he was being praised. And that is why, I continued, letting the words land with the weight of stones, the $100,000 will go to none of you. It has been transferred, in its entirety, to my cousin, Amelia. The daughter you cast out because her heart was more valuable than her name. The color drained from Marcus's face. Clara gasped, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath. That's absurd. Marcus snarled, his mask of benevolence finally cracking. She has no claim. She is not part of this family. She is the only part of it Alistair ever truly valued, I replied calmly. But then, this was never about the 100,000, was it? That was just the bait. This has always been about this. I held up the sealed linen envelope. Alistair's final word. My hands were perfectly still as I broke the seal. The air was thick, heavy, unbreathable. I reached inside and pulled out not a letter, but a folded legal document and a small, antique brass key. This, I announced, is a sworn affidavit, signed by Alistair Thorne the day before he died. I began to read Alistair's words aloud, my voice becoming a vessel for a ghost. Asterisk. I, Alistair Thorne, being of sound mind, do hereby declare that I believe my nephew, Marcus Thorne, represents a direct threat to my life. He has been pressuring me for months to gain control of my finances, and I have refused him. I have installed a concealed, sound-activated recording device in the grandfather clock in my study. The key enclosed herewith is for a safe deposit box at the First National Bank, which contains the audio tape from that device, to be retrieved only by Elias Thorne. Asterisk. Marcus went white as a sheet. This is insanity. The ravings of a dying, paranoid old man. Is it? I didn't look up from the page. I continued to read Alistair's elegant, damning script. Asterisk. He is planning to visit me tonight, on the pretense of a reconciliation. I fear he will not take no for an answer again. If I am dead tomorrow, it was not an accident. It was Marcus. Let this document be my testimony. Asterisk. This whole inheritance, I said, my eyes finally locking onto my uncle's, was never a test of character. It was a trap. A brilliant, patient, posthumous trap to catch a murderer. The word hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. And in that moment, the man I had known my entire life as my uncle vanished. The benevolence, the civility, the carefully constructed performance, it all burned away, leaving behind something raw and feral. With a guttural roar of fury, he lunged for me, his hands outstretched like claws, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. He wasn't trying to get the affidavit. He was trying to silence the archivist. But it was too late. I had already made the call. The sound of sirens, faint at first, then rapidly growing louder, cut through the roar of the storm. A year has passed. My life is quiet again, but it is a different kind of quiet now. It is the quiet of peace, not the quiet of loneliness. The audio tape in the safe deposit box was everything Alistair had promised. It captured the argument, the desperate pleas for money, the shove, and the sickening thud. But most chillingly, it captured the sounds that followed, the sound of Marcus's heavy breathing as he stood over his dying brother. The sound of him checking for a pulse. The sound of him waiting, for an entire, silent hour, before calmly walking out of the house. he will spend the rest of his life in a small, quiet room of his own. A prison cell. The courts named me the sole heir to the $80 million fortune. It doesn't feel like a prize. It feels like a duty, a responsibility. I used it to create the Alistair and Amelia Thorne Foundation, a quiet enterprise dedicated to preserving the things they both loved: rare books, historical archives, and providing art scholarships for students from broken homes. Leo is in a long-term recovery program, paid for by an anonymous donation from the foundation. For the first time, he is fighting for his own life, and I have hope for him. Clara has not spoken to me since that day. She cannot forgive me for excavating and displaying the family's ugly truth. Perhaps she never will. Sometimes, late at night in the archives, surrounded by the stories of the dead, I think about my own. The money did not change my family. It simply held up a mirror to who they had been all along. The greatest lesson Alistair taught me was this: everyone is a history book, filled with secrets and revisions. But the truth, no matter how deep you bury it or how long it lays dormant, will always, eventually, find its way to the light. What's the darkest secret a family can hide? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more narrative journeys. And remember to share this with someone who understands that sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones we know the least. Thank you for listening.